Hello, role-playing people! In this episode of the podcast, we're going to talk about feeding in Vampire the Masquerade, why feeding scenes deserve our complete attention, why this act can carry a lot of risks and complications for the vampire characters, and also why the way we describe these scenes can tell a lot about our protagonists. A few general mentions as presented in the V20 core rulebook. As soon as the vampire's fangs break the victim's skin, that victim can no longer resist the vampire. They are simply stunned in this slightly painful, intensely orgasmic experience called the kiss. Mortals can only resist this ecstasy if they have willpower ratings of 9+, whereas the strongest willed mortals usually have a rating of 4. They cannot resist the kiss. So powerful is this pleasure that kindred themselves also succumb to that ecstasy unless the player rolls a successful self-control at the difficulty of 8. The core rulebook also mentions that some kind and kindred develop lusts for the kiss and actively seek out those who will drink their blood. Giovanni are the exception to all of this, of course, as their kiss does the exact opposite. It inflicts agony onto the vessel, so much so that the vessel can go into shock and die long before they are exsanguinated. In light of these things, I'm tempted to say it's not the act of drawing blood from the victim that leaves them groggy, stunned, maybe even passed out, but the very pleasure of the kiss, regardless of how much blood is being taken. So a lot of my players would be tempted to say, sweet, feeding has an inbuilt system for covering up the masquerade, and that's that. What's the big deal? Well, the long-lasting and hurtful consequences of the kiss become immediately visible if, instead of looking at this from the predator's perspective, we look at it from the prey's perspective. And to illustrate this point, I'll give you some examples. But before we go into those, because the act of feeding is so erotic, it's so sexual in its nature, be warned that we are about to look at this from two different perspectives, with the second one being a description of how someone is jumped for their blood in a dark alleyway, which effectively means assaulted. The listener's well-being is very important to me, so if you think or know that you won't enjoy that narrative example, please check the video description down below for the time and skip that part, alright? The game deals with mature themes of horror, and I fully intend on talking about them in a mature and responsible manner. That being said, let's go. Imagine meeting someone who is absolutely amazing at a fancy social event. The way they look and talk makes you feel like this is the kind of person who would never even give you a second glance. But guess what? They're interested in you. After a beautiful evening of getting to know each other a bit better, this gorgeous person takes you upstairs for a cup of coffee, shall we say. Unlike your usual cup of coffee, being with this person is just amazing. It's so good you actually pass out from the pleasure and recover a few minutes later. They already left, but a solitary note with a phone number is by your side. You call the next day, and again the day after, and so on, but there is no response. So you go about your business. Months go by as you keep calling, but again, no response. In the meantime, you meet other people, you have coffee with some of them, but it's just not the same. Something is always lacking. Mechanically, your playmates are doing everything right, and they are very attractive, but nothing compares to the adventure you had with that one person all those months ago. Your frustrations are growing constantly as you're beginning to realize you'll never have that experience again. But out of the blue, you get a call. It's them. They want to get together tomorrow night. So you can barely get through the day from the excitement. You can't wait to see them again. And when you do see them again, they don't disappoint. The coffee is absolutely mind-blowing. Better still, this time, the person stays in contact, though they consistently refuse to share much about themselves. But you can live with that. What you have is special. What you have is rare. You get to have the best coffee whenever this person calls you, and you get to have it in their fancy car, after work hours in their office, while taking a stroll on the beach at night, and so on. Every encounter is ecstatic, mind-blowing, and before you know it, you need this person that you barely know. You need them. Being with others leaves you cold. There is no one else you care about. No one else will satisfy. You are now addicted to them and their coffee. Now let's imagine another scenario, and again, be warned, this one is not nice at all. You are walking home at night, taking a shortcut through a dark alley, when someone grabs you and forces you against the wall. You scream at them to stop. You try to fight them off, but their grip is like a vice. And this person smells really bad. You can only imagine what they look like, though you can't see their face, but they smell really bad. They hold you down and bite you, either your neck or your wrist, and you can't do a thing to stop it. You're helpless. And then you feel it, the pulse of pleasure, an amazing orgasm. Your head is spinning, everything inside you is growing hot, then cold. You are floating outside of yourself, and then you pass out. You come to your senses only a few minutes later to discover you are alone, sitting on the ground, slumped against the cold brick wall in this alleyway. You can still feel that disgusting smell on your clothes. It stinks so bad it makes you want to vomit. You are completely disgusted at the realization that you had an orgasm as some filthy stranger just bit you. You look at your wrist and there's nothing there. So you're doubting everything. Did it really happen? Why can you feel the smell? You can feel the smell. What's going on here? And you are so disgusted and confused. You think to yourself, there is no way this happened. It couldn't have. I must have just passed out for some reason. You say to yourself you'll go see a doctor first thing in the morning. You get home, you try to sleep, but it comes back in your dreams, in nightmares, and you wake up as if electrocuted every time you fall asleep, so you can't sleep. You can't explain what happened, but something obviously did, and it's affecting the way you act, making you either avoidant to the point that you're constantly taking new routes from work to home, trying desperately not to end up in the same situation, or so aggressive that you armed yourself to the teeth and you frequently go back to that alleyway around the same time, thinking you're going to find whoever did whatever to you and beat some answers out of them. But all you want, all you really want, is for whatever happened in that alleyway to have never happened at all. Now, both scenarios have something in common. The mortal victim, the one being fed upon, isn't the same after the kiss. There is a good reason why I'm using the word victim here, because even the most humane and polite kindred of the Camarilla always take more than they give. They always hurt mortals, especially if we consider the long-lasting psychological implications. The kiss in all its forms is the first step towards becoming enslaved to the blood. The submissive and curious ones probably become ghouls, servants to a domitor who cares little for them but takes them in order to maintain secrecy and to have a steady supply of willing meals. The broken ones can draw too much attention, and so do the aggressively curious ones who demand answers and are willing to go against mortal laws to obtain them. In light of this, the act of feeding is not something to get careless about. It is never something to get careless about. Ah, I hear you say, but I have the herd background, so I don't have to worry about any of that. Yes, but the herd background mechanically simply adds dice to your hunting action dice pool. You still have to hunt and thus narrate and describe how your character goes about acquiring their precious blood, what type of person they feed on, and how they go about it while still maintaining the masquerade. These vessels are not ghouls, they are not retainers, they are not part of the society of the undead, they are mere herd. You feed on the same person one too many times, you will either introduce them to the night as your servant or risk breaking the masquerade, because the consequences we have mentioned before are always there. So while it may seem trivial for most players, feeding is not like taking food out of the refrigerator. This is why princes often calculate and consider the best kindred to kind ratio for their domain. This is why going over a certain number of kindred inhabitants in a city can be very detrimental for the masquerade, because every single kindred is a network, a collection, a habitat. They have herd and ghouls and resources, allies and contacts. They need and corrupt, shall we say, a certain space and a certain number of people. The lower the kindred number is, the more isolated missing persons cases will be, the more isolated incidents of assault or anemia, people randomly fainting in the streets at night, and so on. And any sane kindred will want those numbers low, because if one person shouts to the world, "Someone assaulted me and ate my blood," the incident will be easy to cover up. Well, it will be easier to cover up. But if 10 people start talking, gathering evidence and exchanging information with others, the masquerade finds itself on shaky, shaky ground. Or hunters appear in your city. The point of this little essay is to encourage care and attention to detail when describing the character's feeding, if possible. If the action is thick and the protagonists are feeding in a hurry, sure, being super careful might not be their priority right now. As storyteller, I have let people just roll for the hunting and consider that their characters are experienced enough not to make rookie mistakes if the protagonists were expected elsewhere and their presence was extremely important story-wise. But in absence of these situations, I always take my time with these scenes, because a botched, careless feeding can be extremely damaging to the masquerade. It can create a lot of drama and can lead to sometimes very tragic stories. There is a reason why elders don't run around burning blood on disciplines just because they can, because they are aware that most supernatural abilities are both a risk, secrecy-wise, and a toll on the individuals, but also the collective resources of a city. The kiss will always make mortals suffer, one way or another, whether it's immediately visible or it becomes visible later on. Even when they are well-intended, vampires are still the bad guys. Lupines call vampires leeches, and this is a very fitting term, even when some kindred tend towards a more symbiotic relationship with their mortals. But most of them are parasites. Now, let's get technical a little bit. Feeding needs to be done carefully, and the players are encouraged to consider the character's preferences and methods when asked how they go about it to really present those elements of the character. Saying something like, "I'm going to look around for someone to feed on," doesn't say much about the character. Saying something like, "I'm going to go to X club on Y street where Z types of people tend to gather around this time of the evening. I'm wearing my best outfit because I plan on seducing someone, and I will be looking as usual for older men, at least in their late 30s, well-dressed, preferably unaccompanied. I'm spending about an hour in this place. If my type doesn't come in, well, I'll be quite frustrated, but hey, I'll try another location 2 blocks from here." This tells us so much more about the character's approach and preferences and their habitat, the places they frequent, the people they know, and it presents their herd background in a very narrative and interesting way. If this feels Ventru, it's because it is Ventru. Let's try a Nosferatu next. I will be making my way unseen to X part of town where the beautiful people hang out. While cloaked in shadows, I will simply observe them, picking out a well-dressed young man, the most sociable one I can find, the one who looks most self-confident and assured. Is such a person in sight? Ah, perfect. I will take my time observing him, getting closer and closer, making sure to avoid any nearby cameras while remaining obfuscated. As soon as I find the right moment when he is heading towards his car, probably, I will spring for his wrist and take 2 blood points in a hurry. Satisfied, I lick the wound closed. Let's make this interesting. If a dumpster is nearby, I throw him in it like he's some used tissue, but not before going through his wallet, checking his ID. As I walk away, obfuscated yet again, I think to myself, I will enjoy making his life miserable starting this night, and now I know exactly who he is. So there we go. Feeding is a great opportunity to show character, to really play into maybe your demeanor, maybe your nature. It is a central element of the game, and that is why I think it should get all the attention it deserves. If the pacing and the mood of the game also allows this, of course. It is one of those moments that can lead to really interesting scenes and side stories, shall we say. Thank you very much for listening. Take care, have fun, and don't forget to play.